I will crush everything you've built.
The crunch of metal against metal echoed through the parking lot. Peter Glinsk sat perfectly still in his Honda Civic, watching the rearview mirror as steam rose from the luxury SUV that had just slammed into his bumper. The driver stumbled out, tall, expensive suit, phone pressed to his ear mid-conversation. No, I can handle this, the man was saying, his voice carrying across the asphalt. Just some nobody in a beater car. Peter stepped out slowly, adjusting his glasses. The man looked familiar, but Peter couldn't place him. Clean-shaven, confident smirk. The kind of guy who never doubted he belonged in any room he entered. Sorry about that, the man said, not sounding sorry at all. Kevin Poulter. He extended his hand without looking up from his phone. I'll have my insurance handle this. You weren't hurt, were you? Peter shook the offered hand, noting the expensive watch, the manicured nails. Peter Glinsk. No, I'm fine. Kevin's eyes sharpened slightly at the name. Glinsk? That's unusual. You wouldn't happen to know Emily Glinsk, would you? Works in real estate compliance. The question hit Peter like cold water. She's my wife. No kidding. Kevin's smile widened. Small world. She looked absolutely stunning at the conference last week. That blue dress really brought out her eyes. Peter felt something shift in his chest. Emily had told him she was working late last Tuesday. She hadn't mentioned any conference. She definitely hadn't worn a blue dress. She'd left the house in her usual gray pantsuit. The conference? Peter asked carefully. At the Marriott downtown, industry thing. She was the life of the party. Kevin chuckled, then seemed to catch himself. Anyway, here's my card. Have your guy call mine. Peter took the business card. Kevin Poulter, Senior Risk Assessment Officer, Morrison & Associates, the same company where Emily worked. Right, Peter said. I'll do that. Kevin climbed back into his SUV and drove off, leaving Peter standing in the parking lot holding a business card and a growing sense that something was very wrong. That evening, Peter sat at his kitchen table reviewing insurance forms when Emily walked in, tossing her purse on the counter with practiced casualness. How was your day? She asked, not looking at him as she sorted through mail. Interesting. Got rear-ended outside the university. Oh no, are you okay? Fine. Guy named Kevin Poulter said he knows you from work. Emily's hand paused over an envelope just for a second. Kevin? Oh, right. He's in risk assessment. Did he give you his insurance information? He mentioned seeing you at a conference last week, Tuesday night at the Marriott. Now she did look at him, her expression perfectly neutral. Conference? Oh, that thing, just a boring compliance meeting. Nothing worth mentioning. He said you looked stunning in a blue dress. Emily laughed, but it sounded forced. He's probably confusing me with someone else. You know how these work events are. Everyone blends together. She headed upstairs and Peter heard the shower turn on. Her phone, forgotten on the kitchen counter, buzzed with a text message. The screen lit up showing KP and a preview. Can't wait for next Thursday. Peter stared at the phone until the screen went dark. Then he opened his laptop and began what he would later recognize as the first entry in a very different kind of ledger. Over the next week, Peter paid attention in ways he hadn't for years. Emily had always been particular about her appearance, but now he noticed the extra care she took with her makeup on certain days. The way she checked her phone constantly, turning it face down when he entered the room. The subtle changes in her schedule, working late more often, weekend errands that took hours longer than they should. As the university's assistant controller, Peter had spent 15 years developing an eye for irregularities. Numbers that didn't add up. Patterns that revealed themselves only to someone patient enough to look. Now, he turned that same methodical attention to his wife. He started with their finances, credit card statements, bank records, loan documents. What he found made his stomach turn. Emily had taken out a personal loan for $25,000 using both their names, but the money had never appeared in their joint accounts. She'd also opened a separate credit card, one he'd never seen. The statements, when he finally tracked them down, showed charges at expensive restaurants during her supposed late work nights. Hotel rooms, lingerie purchases from stores she'd never shopped at before. Peter sat in his home office at 2 a.m, spreadsheets glowing on his monitor, and felt something cold settling in his chest. The numbers told a story he didn't want to believe, but they didn't lie. Numbers never lied. His daughter Sasha knocked on the doorframe. Dad, you okay? At 17, Sasha had Emily's sharp features, but Peter's thoughtful eyes. She'd always been closer to her mother, viewing Peter as steady but unexciting, the parent who helped with homework while Emily planned adventures. Just work stuff, Peter said, minimizing the spreadsheet. What are you doing up? Couldn't sleep. Mom's been weird lately, don't you think? Peter looked at his daughter carefully. Weird how? I don't know. Happy, I guess, but like secretly happy. She hums when she thinks no one's listening, and she's been buying new clothes. Expensive stuff. Sasha shrugged. Maybe she got a promotion? Maybe, Peter said. The next morning, Emily announced she'd be working late again. Big compliance review, she said, kissing his cheek with lips that tasted like new lipstick. Don't wait up. After she left, Peter made a decision that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. He called in sick to work and followed his wife. Emily's office building was downtown, a sleek glass tower that housed Morrison and Associates along with several other firms. Peter parked across the street and waited. At 11:47 a.m., Emily emerged from the building and walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop. Kevin Palter was already there, sitting in a corner booth. Peter watched through the window as his wife slid into the seat across from Kevin. She leaned forward, laughing at something he said. Kevin reached across the table and touched her hand. Emily didn't pull away. They sat there for 43 minutes. Peter timed it. When they finally left, Kevin's hand was on the small of Emily's back, guiding her toward the parking garage. Peter followed at a distance, staying several cars behind as Kevin's SUV, now repaired from their accident, pulled out of downtown and headed toward the interstate. The Fairmont Hotel was 20 minutes outside the city, upscale but not flashy. The kind of place that catered to business travelers who valued discretion over luxury. Peter watched from the parking lot as Emily and Kevin entered the lobby together. They didn't come out for 3 hours. That night, Emily came home at her usual late work time, complained about the compliance review, and asked Peter how his day had been. Quiet, he said. Just worked on some budget projections. She nodded and went upstairs to shower. Again. Peter sat at his kitchen table and opened a new spreadsheet. This one wasn't for the university. This one was for tracking a different kind of accounting, the balance sheet of his marriage, with entries for lies told, trust broken, and betrayal compounded with interest. Over the following weeks, Peter developed a routine. He would call in sick, follow Emily, and document everything. Times, locations, duration of meetings. He learned that Thursdays were their regular hotel days. Tuesdays, they met for lunch and drove to Kevin's apartment, a sleek high-rise that cost more than Peter's annual salary. Peter also learned things about Kevin that Emily probably didn't know. Like the fact that Kevin was married too, though his wife lived in Boston, while he maintained his Columbus apartment for work purposes. Like the gambling debts Kevin had racked up, Peter found the records by hacking into Kevin's poorly secured personal email account. It turned out Kevin Palter was not nearly as successful as he appeared. His apartment was leased through his company, his car payments were 3 months behind, and he'd been borrowing money from Emily, Peter's money, it turned out, to cover his losses at underground poker games. The final piece fell into place on a Thursday in October. Peter had positioned himself in the hotel bar, nursing a coffee and reading a newspaper while Emily and Kevin occupied their usual room upstairs. A young woman entered the lobby, clearly agitated, and approached the front desk. "I'm looking for Kevin Palter," she said loudly enough for Peter to hear. "I know he's here. He was supposed to meet me 2 hours ago." The desk clerk murmured something about privacy policies, but the woman was having none of it. "His wife hired me to find him," she announced. "Private investigator. So either you help me or I start checking every room." Peter folded his newspaper and left the bar. In the parking lot, he called Emily's phone. "Hey, honey," he said when she answered, slightly breathless. "How's the compliance review going?" "Oh, tedious. We're probably going to be here for another few hours." "That's too bad. I was hoping we could grab dinner." "Maybe tomorrow? I really need to focus on this." "Of course." "Love you. Love you too." Peter hung up and sat in his car, staring at the hotel entrance. 23 years of marriage. 17 years since Sasha was born. A mortgage, shared bank accounts, family vacations, and parent-teacher conferences. All of it built on a foundation that was apparently more fragile than he'd ever imagined. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Review running even later than expected. Probably won't be home until after midnight." It was 4:17 p.m. That night, Peter didn't go home. Instead, he drove to a 24-hour diner and sat in a corner booth, drinking coffee and thinking. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, kept refilling his cup without being asked. "Rough day?" she finally said around 11 p.m. "You could say that. Want to talk about it?" Peter looked at her, this stranger who had no reason to care about his problems, and felt something break inside him. "I think my wife is having an affair," he said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. "I'm sorry," the waitress said. "That's gotta hurt. The weird part is, I'm not even surprised. Looking back, I can see all the signs. I just chose not to see them. What are you going to do?" Peter stared into his coffee cup. "I honestly don't know." But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't entirely true. He was an accountant. He understood balance sheets, profit and loss statements, the mathematics of cause and effect. Emily had spent months creating a deficit in their marriage. Lies where there should have been truth, betrayal where there should have been trust. It was time to balance the books. The next morning, Peter submitted his resignation to the university. He told his supervisor he was taking early retirement to pursue consulting opportunities. It wasn't entirely a lie. He was planning to consult extensively on a very specific project. With his university access revoked, Peter had to get creative about his surveillance. He rented a small office space across from Emily's building, using his retirement funds. He purchased high-end camera equipment and learned about digital tracking software. He studied Kevin's habits, financial records, and personal history with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to university budgets. What he discovered was that Kevin Poulter was a house of cards waiting to fall. The gambling debts were worse than Peter had initially calculated. Kevin had been skimming money from client accounts, small amounts, carefully hidden, but Peter's trained eye spotted the irregularities. Kevin was also running an elaborate expense account fraud, billing personal charges to corporate cards and manipulating reimbursement forms. Most interesting of all, Kevin had been embezzling funds from a charity account that Morrison and Associates managed. The theft was sophisticated. Kevin would transfer money to a shell company, let it sit for exactly 31 days, then move it to another account before returning most of it to the original fund. The missing portions accumulated in an offshore account that Kevin probably thought was untraceable. Peter traced it in 6 hours. Armed with this information, Peter began to construct his response. If Emily wanted to play games with trust and betrayal, he would show her what those games looked like when played by an expert. The first move was subtle. Peter created an anonymous email account and sent a tip to Morrison and Associates' internal audit department. Nothing dramatic, just a suggestion that they might want to take a closer look at some unusual patterns in their expense reporting. He included enough specific details to get their attention, but not enough to immediately point to Kevin. The second move was more personal. Peter had learned that Kevin's wife in Boston, Linda, was growing suspicious about her husband's extended stays in Columbus. Kevin had been feeding her stories about a long-term project that required him to maintain a local apartment, but Linda was starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Peter called Linda's office in Boston, identifying himself as a colleague of Kevin's who was concerned about some irregularities in shared project files. He suggested she might want to review the credit card statements for accounts Kevin had access to. He was careful to sound worried rather than accusatory, just a concerned coworker looking out for a colleague's family. The third move targeted Emily directly. Peter had installed monitoring software on their home router, giving him access to everything Emily did online. He discovered that she'd been researching divorce attorneys and had even scheduled a consultation for the following week. She'd also been transferring money from their joint savings account to her personal account. Small amounts, but consistent. Peter transferred the money back, then changed the account access codes. When Emily tried to move money again, she found herself locked out. She never mentioned it to Peter, which told him everything he needed to know about her plans. But Peter's most elegant move involved the private investigator who'd been tracking Kevin for his wife. Peter contacted the man, identifying himself as a concerned friend who'd noticed Kevin acting strangely. He shared some of the financial information he'd uncovered, suggesting that Kevin might be in some kind of trouble that could affect people who cared about him. The investigator was grateful for the information. He'd been hired to document Kevin's infidelity, but evidence of financial crimes would be much more valuable to his client. Within 2 weeks, Kevin's carefully constructed life began to unravel. The internal audit at Morrison and Associates expanded from a routine expense review to a full investigation. Linda Poulter arrived in Columbus unannounced, armed with credit card statements and bank records that painted a very unflattering picture of her husband's activities. Peter watched it all unfold from his rented office across the street. He saw Kevin arriving at work earlier and staying later, clearly trying to manage multiple crises. He saw Emily growing increasingly agitated, her phone calls more frequent and urgent. The breaking point came on a Thursday. Peter positioned himself in the hotel bar as usual, but this time Kevin and Emily's meeting was brief and heated. Even from across the lobby, Peter could see that they were arguing. Emily left after 20 minutes, her face flushed with anger. That evening, she came home earlier than she had in weeks. "How was work?" Peter asked, looking up from the book he was pretending to read. "Stressful," Emily said. "There's some kind of audit happening. Everyone's on edge." "Audit? That sounds serious." "It's probably nothing. You know how these corporate things go, lots of drama over paperwork." But Peter could see the worry in her eyes. Emily was smart enough to know that audits didn't happen without reason, and she was probably wondering what Kevin might have done that could reflect badly on her. Over the next few days, Peter watched his wife's confidence erode. She jumped every time her phone rang. She stayed late at work, but Peter knew she wasn't meeting Kevin. He was too busy trying to save his own career to continue their affair. The final domino fell when Linda Palter filed for divorce and simultaneously contacted the FBI about her husband's financial activities. Kevin was arrested at his office on a Friday morning, charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion. Peter watched from his office window as Kevin was led out of the building in handcuffs. Emily was nowhere to be seen. She'd called in sick that morning, claiming she had the flu. That weekend, Peter made his own decisive move. He printed out every document he'd gathered over the past 2 months: financial records, surveillance photos, email printouts, phone logs, hotel receipts. He organized them in a manila folder with the same precision he'd once used for university audit reports. Then he sat Emily down at their kitchen table and placed the folder in front of her. "I know," he said simply. Emily stared at the folder without opening it. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, denial, calculation, and finally, resignation. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since the car accident." "Kevin mentioned seeing you in a blue dress at a conference you never told me about." Emily opened the folder and began flipping through the documents. Peter watched her face as she saw the surveillance photos, the hotel receipts, the records of money transfers. "This is a lot of work," she said quietly. "I'm good at my job." "What do you want?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Peter had been asking himself the same thing for weeks. What did he want? An apology, an explanation, his wife back? "I want you to understand what you've cost," he said. Emily looked up from the folder. "What I've cost?" 23 years of marriage, Sasha's respect for her mother, my ability to trust anyone ever again. Kevin's career, though I suppose he managed that himself. His marriage. Your job, eventually. My job? Peter reached across the table and opened the folder to a specific page. "Morrison and Associates doesn't know yet that you've been having an affair with Kevin, but they will. Internal audit investigations are very thorough. They'll discover that you've been covering for his expense account irregularities, helping him manipulate compliance reports, and using company resources for personal meetings." Emily's face went pale. "You can't prove that." "I can prove you've been meeting him during work hours, using company time for personal business. I can prove you've been in his apartment during the day when you claim to be in compliance meetings. I can prove you took out loans using forged documents, loans that were used to pay Kevin's gambling debts." The last part wasn't entirely true, but Peter had learned that the most effective lies were built on foundations of truth. "You're bluffing," Emily said, but her voice lacked conviction. Peter reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his photos until he found the one he wanted. Emily and Kevin entering Kevin's apartment building at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, clearly visible and time-stamped. "I have hundreds of these," he said. "Different locations, different dates, all during hours when you were supposedly at work." Emily stared at the photo, and Peter saw the exact moment when she realized how completely she'd been outmaneuvered. "What do you want?" she asked again. "I want you to leave," Peter said. "Tonight. I want you to take whatever you can fit in a suitcase and find somewhere else to live. I want you to sign divorce papers that give me full custody of Sasha and leave you with exactly what you brought into this marriage 23 years ago." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Peter laughed, and he was surprised by how cold it sounded. "You stole from our joint accounts to pay your lover's debts. You lied to me every day for months. You were planning to divorce me and take half of everything I've worked for, including money I didn't even know you'd stolen. What exactly about any of this strikes you as fair?" Emily closed the folder and pushed it away from her. "I never meant for it to happen, but it did happen. And now there are consequences. I need time to think." "No," Peter said. "You need to pack." That night, Emily filled 2 suitcases with clothes and left to stay with her sister across town. Peter helped her carry the bags to her car, maintaining the same polite courtesy he'd shown her for 2 decades of marriage. "What will you tell Sasha?" Emily asked. "The truth. She's old enough to understand that actions have consequences." Emily drove away, and Peter stood in his driveway, watching her taillights disappear. He felt hollow, but also strangely relieved. The uncertainty was over. The pretending was finished. Sasha came home from her friend's house an hour later and immediately noticed her mother's absence. "Where's Mom?" Peter sat his daughter down in the living room and explained everything. He showed her some of the evidence, not the photos, but the financial records that proved Emily had been stealing from their family to support another man. Sasha listened without interrupting. When Peter finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I knew something was wrong," she finally said. "The way she looked at her phone all the time. The way she seemed happier when you weren't around. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Are you getting divorced?" "Yes." "Can I stay with you?" Peter felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Of course. Over the next few months, Peter's predictions proved accurate. Morrison and Associates completed their internal investigation and terminated Emily for violation of company policies. She wasn't charged with any crimes. Peter had been careful to ensure that her involvement with Kevin's schemes appeared naive rather than criminal, but her career in compliance was effectively over. Kevin pleaded guilty to multiple charges and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. His wife divorced him and moved back to Boston with their children. His apartment was seized as part of asset forfeiture and his luxury car was repossessed. Emily found work as a receptionist at a small insurance office, making less than half her previous salary. She moved into a studio apartment and drove a 10-year-old sedan. Peter heard these details through mutual friends who seemed to think he should feel sorry for his ex-wife. He didn't. The divorce was finalized in February. Emily signed the papers without contesting Peter's terms. She understood that fighting would only result in more of her secrets being made public. Peter kept the house, the savings accounts, and custody of Sasha. Emily received her personal belongings and half the proceeds from selling her car to pay legal fees. Peter returned to work, taking a position as controller at a smaller university across town. The pay was better, and he found satisfaction in applying his skills to an organization that valued precision and accountability. 6 months after the divorce, Emily showed up at Peter's house on a Saturday morning. Sasha was at a friend's house, and Peter was working in his garden, something he'd taken up since the divorce. "We need to talk," Emily said. Peter straightened up, brushing soil from his hands. Emily looked older, thinner. Her hair was shorter and grayer, and she wore the kind of clothes that came from discount stores rather than department stores. "About what?" "About what you did to Kevin, and to me." Peter wiped his hands on a towel and studied his ex-wife's face. "What I did? You destroyed us, systematically, like we were a problem you needed to solve. You destroyed yourselves. I just made sure there were consequences." Kevin lost everything. His job, his family, his freedom. And for what? Because you couldn't handle the fact that I was happy with someone else? Peter felt something cold settle in his stomach. Happy? Yes, happy. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Kevin made me feel beautiful, desired, important. And you couldn't stand that. Peter stared at his ex-wife, and for a moment he saw her as she used to be, confident, vibrant, the woman he'd fallen in love with in college. But that woman had made choices, and those choices had consequences. "You stole money from our family to pay for your happiness," Peter said quietly. "You lied to me every day for months. You were planning to leave me with nothing while you started a new life with money you'd stolen from our joint accounts. I would have figured out a way to pay it back." "With what? Kevin's embezzled funds? His gambling winnings?" Emily's face crumpled. "He wasn't a bad person. He just made some mistakes. He was stealing from a charity account, Emily, money that was supposed to help sick children. Whatever mistakes I've made in our marriage, I never stole from sick children." "You didn't have to destroy him completely." Peter looked at the woman he'd lived with for more than 2 decades, and he realized that he felt nothing for her. Not love, not hate, not even pity. She had become a stranger to him, someone whose moral compass pointed in a direction he couldn't understand. "I didn't destroy Kevin," Peter said. "I simply made sure that people knew who he really was. If that destroyed him, it says more about him than it does about me." Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What about us? What about Sasha? Sasha is fine. She's doing well in school. She has friends, and she's learned an important lesson about the difference between people who keep their promises and people who break them. She won't even take my calls anymore. That's her choice. She's 17. Old enough to decide for herself what kind of relationship she wants with her mother. Emily stared at him for a long moment. You've changed, she said. You used to be kind. Peter considered this. I used to be naive. There's a difference. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me. And you would have kept hurting me if I hadn't stopped you. That's the difference between us, Emily. When I realized what kind of person you'd become, I did something about it. Emily turned to leave, then stopped. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you just talked to me? If you'd told me you knew about Kevin and asked me to end it? Peter thought about it seriously. Would you have ended it? Emily was quiet for a long time. I don't know. Then you have your answer. After Emily left, Peter sat on his porch and thought about the conversation. He wondered if he should feel guilty about Kevin's prison sentence, about Emily's reduced circumstances, about the chain of events he'd set in motion. But he didn't feel guilty. He felt something that had been missing from his life for months. Peace. That evening, Sasha came home and found Peter reading on the porch. Mom stopped by earlier, she said, settling into the chair next to his. I know. She wanted to talk. What did she say? She thinks I was too harsh in how I handled things. Sasha was quiet for a moment. Do you think you were? Peter marked his place in his book and looked at his daughter. At 17, she was already showing signs of the woman she would become. Thoughtful, direct, unafraid of difficult questions. I think I was exact, he said. Your mother made choices, and I made sure those choices had appropriate consequences. Maybe someone else would have handled it differently, but I handled it the way I knew how. Like an accountant, Peter smiled. Like an accountant. Sasha leaned back in her chair. I'm glad you did it the way you did. If you'd just forgiven her and taken her back, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering when she was going to lie to us again. Peter reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand. You don't have to choose sides. I'm not choosing sides. I'm choosing to live with the parent who tells the truth. As the sun set over their quiet street, Peter reflected on the past year. He'd lost a wife, but kept his daughter. He'd lost his trust in people, but gained a clearer understanding of his own strength. He'd lost his naivete, but gained something more valuable, the knowledge that he was capable of protecting the things that mattered to him. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Hi, I'm Sarah from the book club. We met at the coffee shop last week. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Peter stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. He wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe he never would be. But for now, he had his daughter, his work, and his peace of mind. After everything that had happened, that felt like enough. He opened his book and continued reading as the stars came out overhead, and for the first time in months, Peter Glinsk felt exactly where he belonged.